Greetings, kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome back to our World of Darkness and another Q&A video. I am loving these. This is the second one that we've been able to do, and this one just kind of popped up in one post. Blood of the Unicorns 2621 was watching one of my recaps where I had mentioned that if the vampires in my game had decided to go into a frozen river, that they would take damage, and that not only confused a couple of my players, but also brought up the question of what type of situations can cause vampires to have damage like that. And and like I was saying, Blood of the Unicorns, they started asking me questions about kindred physiology, and that is just something that we have not covered very much. And I think I want to do a full a vampire anatomy check and physiology and all that kind of thing. But I was very happy that they went ahead and they asked 12 questions. So Blood of the Unicorns 2621, this is for you and anybody who else gets anything from this. But I love answering questions, and Q&A videos are a lot of fun. So let's just go ahead and hop in on this one. Is feeding always either a sexual act or being eaten by a wild animal? No, it's not. There are as many ways to feed as there are kindred, truthfully. You could say, oh, there are specific ways of feeding that each clan tends to take on, and yes, there are going to be those stereotypes, and I think the idea of the predator type really pinpoints the different styles of feeding and what various things can come about from feeding in specific ways. Predator types, it's not something that I want to go too deep in for, but we have the alley cat, which are assault feeders. These are people who act in the alleyway, grab and bite down. Now, the human reaction to feeding is more limited because you don't really have a choice as a person how you're being fed from most of the time. There are vampires who choose to use an outside source, such as a blade or even a keg tap in the case of some in Giovanni Chronicles. Claudius Giovanni used literally a tap where he put it. Anyway, but the idea that it just has to be sexual, no, that's actually just a way for the masquerade to be covered up very easily. Feeding like that, it's an easy way to basically write off the experience for humans, because the kiss of the vampire, the actual bite, the penetration of the fangs, does tend to go from pain to pleasure very quickly, which in my personal thought process is a survival a survival adaptation on the side of the kindred, where humans don't care that they're being fed from during the act if it's done smoothly. This kind of thing can be seen in mosquitoes, where their saliva, and vampire bats actually, where their saliva will actually cause a decoagulating agent to keep the blood flowing, and also a slight anesthetic to stop it from being irritating during the feeding. That is why vampires have that kind of thing. But the style of feeding does not have to be sexual. The style of feeding does not have to be bestial. You don't just have to rip in. You could actually just walk up, bite, and let go. That kind of thing. And where the human might take it as a sexual experience in memory, it doesn't actually have to be a sexual experience during the process. Does kindred blood expire? Can it be used to ghoul someone after a year in the refrigerator? You know what? This is really going to depend on the editions of Vampire the Masquerade. In Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, however, it states specifically in the book that it has to be from the source to be used to ghoul or to blood bond, which basically makes it so that like you can't put it in drinks. In my game, we went back to using the older rules where kindred blood stays good outside the body for up to an hour before it loses its properties. In a hunter game scenario, I can see where the blood of a vampire being good for longer periods of time is going to be more fun to integrate into your game, because think of the experiments that you can run on these things. But having it also only last for a specific amount of time outside of the body can also give a time crunch to that kind of thing. Now, keeping it in the same fashion that you would keep human blood, where it is chilled and will stay good for a certain amount of time, I mean, it really is going to be storyteller discretion on this kind of thing. But as for book rules, the moment it leaves, if it doesn't go directly into the mouth, it's not good for anything anymore. Which does lead into question 3. If it can still ghoul someone, can it embrace as well? That's the thing. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where after it leaves the container that is the vampire, it does not seem to have much use any longer, which is really, really sad. It also depends really what the storyteller's process is on how embracing works. I've known storytellers who say strictly the embrace can only be given willingly. That you cannot like steal someone else's blood and use that to embrace. Whereas I've also seen people steal blood in games and use it to embrace and cause problems. So I don't know. It really depends. I think that with the whole concept of you have to use it right out of the body, it stops how the Vaulderie would work in the Sabbat in reality, because like they have to pour it into a glass to mix it. But of course, maybe the ritual for Vaulderie in 5th edition causes it to be preserved in some fashion. I really don't know. Unfortunately, this is something in 5th edition specifically that just isn't fleshed out much, and it seems to be limited in a purposeful fashion. But the way that I run it in my games, and again, disclaimer, this is me as a storyteller making storyteller decisions. In my games, in our World of Darkness games, the way that we've handled it is basically saying that blood will stay good for 15 minutes per level of blood potency the vampire has. Once we hit Elder Vampire Blood, however, it's a wild card, and I can do whatever I want with it at that point, and it's all about story. A good example of the way that this is kind of seen in World of Darkness lore in 5th edition is the 5th dot of the Week of Nightmares lore sheet, which is the blood of Zappathasura, which the Andaluvian blood is still alive and active if somebody takes this point. How do Gangrel Mariners survive the deep freeze sea? Okay, this came about primarily because of in the last episode of the Thicker Than Water recap, where they were trying to find a way to escape the red gas that the entity uses while they're being attacked inside of in the city. They had decided that they were going to try to get to the river and walk. Unfortunately, it's late November in northwestern United States, and vampires can take freezing damage. Not getting into that right now. We'll go ahead and answer the Mariner question. First off, I want to point out that Mariners are often considered a bloodline, and they're not. Mariners are not a bloodline. They are a type of Gangrel, but they are not a bloodline of Gangrel. If a vampire who is a Gangrel embraces, that Gangrel is a Gangrel, not necessarily a Mariner, unless they adopt that lifestyle. And also, there's only about 30 of them in the world. There's not many. You're not going to probably find many Gangrel swimming around in the Arctic. The Mariners themselves I do know that the largest group of them is actually in a lake in South Africa. But most of the time, you're going to find them around rivers, lakes, and coastlines on beaches. Now, that can be some cold water, but it's probably not cold enough water to cause them to have problems. If you run into, say, Noeod Gangrel, who are a bloodline of Gangrel from the Nordic regions of the world, who study the Aurora Borealis, and you happen to find a Noeod Mariner, I'm going to go ahead and say that it's probably a mix between the Protean and the Fortitude disciplines that allow them to survive in that type of environment. Now, the reason why cold hurts vampires, though, is because their blood freezes and crystallizes. First, they start finding that they can't utilize disciplines as well. They can't heal as well. Then they find it harder to move, and they start freezing from the inside out, and they will start taking superficial damage over time, where they will eventually just go into torpor. And that could be argued that if they're in the cold long enough and they end up having to fall into day sleep, that the torpor arises due to the fact that they're just frozen and they're not able to rouse the blood to use it to wake up. So there's no defined rules on that happening, but in books such as the Tzimisce Clan Book Revised, they do show vampires who are creating warm havens for themselves to avoid the freezing cold. So that is why I threw that in there. But also mariners, I think considering the fact that there's so few of them, they're just probably not going to be in those cold waters. But then also, if they do happen to be, Fortitude and Protean is going to give you the upper hand in those types of climates. Do kindred keep their blood in their bodies or some other magical space? Okay, the idea of vampires having blood L space. It is in their bodies. It is physically in their bodies. It is primarily centered in the heart. But obviously, if you have several pints of blood in the body, if we're looking at V5, we're looking at 5 hunger, and if a human body typically holds about 10 pints of blood, we're probably looking at each hunger point being equivalent of 2 pints of blood. See, I love the hunger system because it takes away the math of how many pints and stuff. Especially with the older systems where you're like, oh, I'm an elder, so I have 20 blood traits. And I'm like, well, if each trait is a pint, that means you have 20 pints of blood in your body and it's just sloshing around in there. When in reality, the way that traits worked in the older systems was how efficiently the vampire was able to utilize the blood. But that also didn't make sense when it came to feeding scenes where your character had to eat more blood, even though it's dumb. I think in the older systems, a vampire should have 10 blood traits, and then when it comes to utilizing that blood, then you can fraction it. But that just adds too much math for people. Myself included, because I know if I'm in the story, I don't want to stop and get my calculator out. But the idea that the vampires are able to hold their blood in another spot in space, no, not really. The thing is, vampires typically don't bleed because they bleed the same way that a corpse does. If you cut someone post-mortem, you might get some welling up, but they don't tend to bleed out because there's nothing pumping the blood. Now, I would say that if a vampire got cut and didn't notice that they got cut, which is off the wall ridiculous, you're going to know if you get cut. But if for some reason they did not know if they got cut, say it's a Malkavian with the old deadened nerves merit, and they rouse the blood for some reason, utilizing a discipline or using blush of health or something like that without healing first, I would say that in the instant that they're rousing the blood, they might bleed a little bit. Because at that point in time, in my head canon, the heart is beating to rouse the blood and pump the blood where it needs to go. But for the most part, most of the blood should be centralized in the torso area, and explains also why a lot of vampires have a cold touch unless they've just fed. But the idea that it's kept in an outside space, no, it's in the body. It's just centralized around the heart, and then just kind of just sitting there until it's utilized. How do ghouls exsanguinate vampires? Can one staked vampire feed a ghoul or ghouls infinitely, or are multiple required? Vampires can be exsanguinated pretty much in the same way that a standard human could, with a little bit more extra work. Using some type of blood pump, for one, would work. A ghoul technically could bite and suck the blood out. Using a syringe, like a big syringe, probably around the heart area, would work really well. There are ways to exsanguinate a vampire, pretty much the same way that a coroner or a mortician would have to exsanguinate a body for preservation purposes. But I don't think this has really come up much in games to really put the science into it, at least not on my end. But I can see it being done without that much of a problem, because they are going to have a good amount of blood in them, especially if they're full, if they've just fed. I do believe that one vampire, however, could solve the ghouling issue for several individuals. It really depends on how much blood is in the vampire system. So, if a smart ghoul decided that they were going to start a cult of ghouls, and they did not have like the blood bond or something like that, or if their blood bond had gone sour and it had now became like a, oh, I need to protect you from yourself kind of situation, you could possibly continuously feed a vampire while draining them, and feed as many ghouls as you want to from that. So technically what you're looking at is a vampire is nothing more than a Brita water filter for ghouls. When a kindred dies, does it leave behind a body or just ashes? That is a great question, and that has been handled in very different ways in multiple media within the world of darkness. In Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, you kill a vampire, they ash, just plume of smoke right in front of you. And there's no way to really tell how old those vampires are. In Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, they always tend to glow out and start sparkling like a fire was ignited within them. In Vampire the Masquerade, from what I've read, whenever you diablerize, they automatically ash. They become a wet ash just on the ground, and that is it. Just ash that can be moved around and swept up, whatever. But when they die of, I don't want to say natural causes, but non-diablerie causes, it depends on what their age was when they died, if that makes any sense. In my opinion, and from what I believe I've read in various vampire literature for Masquerade, is that the body of the dead vampire catches up to where they should be right then. So if you have somebody who's been embraced for a week, you're going to get a pretty nasty desiccated corpse. If you have somebody who's been dead for a couple of months, probably some type of skeletal remains are going to be there. And the older they get, the less and less remains are going to be there. Now, luckily, we have such beautiful Sabbat disciplines, such as visceral absorption, which just drains all of the remains. It liquefies everything and drains them into the caster. But for the most part, if a vampire is killed, their body is going to basically change back to where they should be in the decomposition rate from the time of their embrace to then. How does torpor work exactly? If I voluntarily enter this state, can I voluntarily wake up? If I'm forced in this state, do I require more powerful kindred to wake me? Okay, so torpor is a point of contention, but it is also something that is directly answered in the Vampire the Masquerade core book. So let's go ahead and turn directly to that. Class, if we can all open up our pages of the Vampire the Masquerade core book to page 223. It says, kindred dwell in a halfway state between life and death. Between vampiric unlife and final death lies an undead hibernation known as torpor. While in torpor, the vampire lies completely dead to their surroundings. Reduced to their appearance of a shriveled corpse, they cannot use any disciplines or react in any way to ordinary stimuli. Vampires remain in torpor for a length of time dictated by their humanity. If staked, the vampire remains in torpor past that time until someone or something removes the stake. Removing the stake after a period of torpor expires awakens the vampire immediately, or that night. Vampires awaken from torpor at hunger 5. Once their period of torpor expires, vampires in torpor who are not staked can make a resolve plus awareness test of a difficulty of 2 every time a potential victim enters their vicinity. So I want to take a break on the book to point that out. Once their period of torpor expires, so if you have to stay in torpor for, let's just say, 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, a potential victim walks by, you could notice them. If successful, they awaken long enough to feed, likely entering a hunger frenzy during the process. Once their hunger drops to 4 or below, they rise fully, recovered from the effects of torpor. Vampires enter torpor in 3 ways: from hunger, from damage, and voluntarily. If a vampire attempts to rise for the night with a hunger level of 5 and fails their rouse check, they enter torpor. So in other words, if you just unfortunately have to enter torpor and you haven't fed and you're at a hunger of 5, you could enter torpor that way. If a vampire takes enough aggravated damage to fill their health tracker completely, they automatically enter torpor. They then unconsciously attempt to mend the damage, trying to heal 1 health point per night. If they fully restore themselves, heal all health damage, and mend or recover from all impediments or critical hits, they can rise again. If failed rouse checks to mend damage drive them above hunger 5, they enter torpor as above. So there are different types of torpor. You can have your voluntary torpor, which is basically just a voluntary coma. You can have your damage torpor, which ends when you heal yourself completely from that. But if you do have to consider, though, if you've taken so much damage that you've put yourself in torpor through aggravated damage, you're probably going to try to heal yourself to the point where you don't have any blood, and therefore you're going to enter your hunger torpor, which is the big torpor. A vampire who entered torpor voluntarily still increases their hunger every night until they enter torpor as above. The same rules then apply. To cut short a period of torpor, one can feed a slumbering vampire enough blood of higher blood potency than theirs to slake 1 hunger. So in other words, if you enter torpor voluntarily, you are going to continue doing a rouse check every single night until your blood is gone, in which case you will then enter true torpor, which tends, from what I'm seeing here, to be torpor brought about by lack of blood in the system. Where this does at first sound a little like, oh, that's cheap, it also makes a lot of sense. Vampires need blood to function. Now, if you turn to page 241, on page 241, you're going to find a chart that lists the humanity, dice added to resist frenzy, and then also torpor length. If you have a humanity of 9, you're going to be in torpor for 3 days. If you have a humanity of 8, it is 1 week. Humanity of 7 is 2 weeks. Humanity of 6 is a month. 5 is 1 year. 4, a decade. 3, 5 decades. 2, 1 century. And humanity of 1 is going to leave you into torpor for 5 centuries. So yeah, that is exactly how torpor works. It's actually broken down very well on those 2 pages. Page 223 and page 241 of the core books, if you need to have that in front of you to see. If you do come into this play, this is something that is that could very well happen. But luckily, until you hit humanity of 5, it's really not that big of a deal. When you start losing that battle with the beast, that's when things actually start being a problem. Is there a difference between a child and an adult vampire? Yes, there is. I hate children vampires. That is the biggest difference. No. Yes, there are some slight differences. First off, a child vampire is going to have the mentality of their child until they grow. That's the thing. I never stop their mentality from growing. I do tend to keep them on almost like a selfish scale, but I also do like to keep their imagination just slightly sharper. But I do believe that as they grow, they will emotionally and mentally mature. Physically, on the other hand, if a child is small, which children tend to be, I would say that they do tend to have limited physical traits. The old child flaw in the older editions did limit how many physical traits they could have. I also feel that vampires as children just call too much attention. That's why, much like in the Anne Rice lore, it's considered a crime to embrace. Now, there are famous children kindred in the World of Darkness, such as Nikolai, the Tremere Primogen of Chicago, up until 5th edition, who I believe the little man was taken by the beckoning. But it does happen, but they are physically encumbered at that point. Child vampires are just too much of a risk. Does having higher humanity affect the bodies of kindred, or just their mind? Yes, in fact, the body of the vampire is affected by the strength of the beast versus the strength and integrity of their humanity. And what I mean by that can be seen by reading through the humanity section, which starts on page 236 of the core book. I'm not going to go into direct reading of this right now, but I do want you to see that it does affect how easy it is to use something like Blush of Life, how much a vampire can interact with a human. If a vampire has a high enough humanity, they can drink specific drinks. Like in the core book, it says they can drink red wine because of the viscosity of it. Is very similar to blood, which is not at all true. But I do like the fact that they have that in there. In older vampire stories, such as in the old Vampire the Masquerade television show, Kindred the Embrace, a vampire can actually eat food if they have just fed, but it really did seem to be their humanity that held on to that kind of thing. In this, you can tend to hold down your food longer if you decide to, if you have a higher humanity. Also, there are other things, such as the fact that the lower your humanity gets, the more corpse-like in appearance you get. You become more pale. Your blood tends to focus just in the heart region more than just spreading out through the body. It's harder to make yourself look human. One of my all-time favorite things is that, and this is actually, this is visually seen in the movie Interview with the Vampire, is that the lower the humanity, the more vibrant the predator aspects of a vampire become. They may stop blinking. The lower humanity, you will stop blinking. You will stop instinctually breathing. Also, along with more pallid skin, your eyes change to reflect your predatory nature, which not only makes you more inhuman, but also makes you more appealing to humans at the same time. Almost like the way a Venus flytrap lets off hormones that summons the insects to them. This kind of thing can happen with vampires visually. If you have brown eyes, your eyes turn into a bright, glowing amber color. If you have blue eyes, they become this ice blue, almost like a husky. Green eyes become bright, vibrant emerald colors. So yes, there are going to be some physical changes, not many, but they are enough to raise a couple eyebrows and make you seem inhuman, which is the reason why in the game it's translated to you having a penalty when interacting around humans, because you just you act less human. What happens to vampires when they drink the blood of other supernaturals? Probably one of my all-time favorite things. When you drink a blood of other supernaturals, you do get effects. Vampires drinking other vampires, it's just better quality blood. It makes you feel better. It's like doing a drug. When you feed from a shifter, whether that be a wolf, a cat, a bear, it does not matter. Shifter blood is pure beast. So when you drink it, you tend to frenzy. Just right off the bat. This has always been an interesting an interesting additive to the vampire lore, is if you drink werewolf, you frenzy. Which is great because, like, in some of the old versions where you were allowed to play lower generations, it was like, you can feed off animals, you can only feed off humans, now you have to drink vampires. And I have actually seen charts where it said only the blood of werewolves will sate you. And that is just like, why would that happen? But it is a more potent blood. It does cause frenzy, however. If you feed from a fae, I have heard it being very similar to doing shrooms or dropping acid. It is a drug, it is incredibly addictive, and it makes the vampire hallucinate. And also, from what I remember, become incredibly susceptible to the effects of chemistry and also fae magic. So, yeah. Feeding from a mage can cause various issues. From what I understand, it's very similar to feeding from fae. But it also can have some violent magical reactions. Storyteller discretion. Feeding from a mummy is apparently like drinking dusty, soured milk. It's disgusting, it's foul, it tastes bad. Their blood is rancid in their system. Now, from what I understand, if you drain and kill a mummy, you can just expect for them to eventually regenerate no matter how much damage you've done to their body, and now you just have a pissed off mummy. And feeding from any type of risen, you effectively get the same thing. Which I always found interesting, because personally I've always seen vampires as nothing more than a heightened state of risen. But if you drink from any kind of like wraith fashion other than a possessed, they do tend to be just rancid, nasty blood. Or if you drink from a possessed, you should effectively just get the blood from the human they're possessing. And the last question is, can any supernatural be embraced if it has blood? For example, can a demon with a human body be embraced? I think the easiest answer for that is supposed to be no. But it's also boring, in my opinion. There are examples of supernatural creatures being embraced. You can embrace a werewolf. that gives you an abomination. In my opinion, that also says that you can embrace any shifter. There's no reason why only the werewolves would be susceptible to that. I do know that if you embrace a fae, their fae side tends to die for the most part. But there are also bloodlines, such as the Chiasid and the Megr, which completely disagree with that. Even the Ravno themselves are supposed to have some kind of fae-blooded. I believe if you dig far enough and you do enough research, Ravno was actually supposed to be a Cathane, which is supposed to be effectively like human relatives to fae. But I don't know. I do understand that like vampire blood does tend to kill the fae spirit on the inside, but again, the Megr exists. They're all sterile. They can't embrace. The Chiasid can embrace, but that might actually have something to do with more of who created them. And what I mean by that is like if a low enough generation vampire embrace something, you're probably going to get some more interesting effects than if like a 13th generation or a 12th generation embrace. Embracing a mage, you get vampires. It kills the avatar with inside of them. Example, Clan Tremere. Example, Nagaraja. These were mage houses that turned to the vamp side, so to speak. From what I understand, you cannot embrace a mummy because a mummy cannot die, no matter what. The only thing that kills a mummy is Osiris himself. And then there's also bloodhounds. Also, I would like to point that out is there are in the Freak Legion book, which is a very rare book that I'm very lucky to have my hands on. The Freak Legion book is how to run Fomori. Fomori, from what I understand, are completely repellent to vampires. They cannot do it except for like 2 different species, one of them being bloodhounds. And what ends up happening is the Fomori gets stuck inside the vampire. The vampire gets all access to all the Fomori's abilities, powers, and even the ability to become stronger as a Fomori, while the Fomori is just stuck imprisoned inside the vampire's form, while the regular mind of the vampire keeps going. I'm not sure what would happen if you embraced a demon. I'm really not. I think it might actually depend on how fresh the demon is, if that makes any sense. Because a demon is the spirit of a fallen angel inside of a dead human. That's how they possess. The examples of demons coming back, the examples of demons walking into the earth have always had like, oh, this person has like a gunshot wound, or rope burns around the neck, or something like that. They're always dead humans that have been taken by the demon. I would imagine that if a vampire were to embrace a demon that had just, like, the body just died, storyteller discretion on all things, but you could very well have a very interesting story where a demon is now trapped within the body of a vampire. Give them very limited demon abilities. Perhaps take away all their lore, which is the name of the equivalent of discipline for a demon. But like give them like their own version of horrid form, but like have it be like their angelic form, but not as bad. Perhaps give them true faith or something like that. I'm not really sure. The way demon works is very interesting. I always used to say that demon lore, their powers, was how Khaldoonism actually should work. So like, if you're playing a Khaldoonic sorcerer, you could just give them demonic lores, and the powers kind of like manifest in the same fashion. But yeah, that is yeah. I really wish I had a better answer for you on that last one. But unfortunately, it's just something that was not dug into very much. there's not many demon books out there, and there's unfortunately not much interaction. There's so many books that just cop out and say that, oh, if this person gets, if this type of thing gets embraced, it just dies. But like, that's so boring. And where I do think hybrids should be sparingly used, they could also be fun. So much fun. Myself and a storyteller that I used to work with, we created a hybrid of wraith and vampires called the Filch, years back, and we had so much fun with that because we basically gave them obtenebration, whatever other discipline they want, and then choice of arcanoi, which are wraith powers, which was just so much fun. Being able to have that interaction and just change things up a little bit after so many years of playing. But that is all of the questions that we have from Blood of the Unicorns 2621. I would like to thank you one more time for writing those questions. I love answering things like this, and yeah, anytime I get to do something like this, it's just a lot of fun. It tries my own knowledge of all the years that I've been playing and all the years I've been storytelling. It also allows me to go online and like look stuff up and have a direct path of what the study should be. So it does not take too long to do these things, but it also is a great exercise as a storyteller to be able to do these things. So if anybody wants another Q&A video, I am going to do minimum 10 questions to like give us something to actually think about. I try not to make the videos too long, but I also try to make sure that they have enough content to be at least a little entertaining. So I like the fact that we had an entire list of questions that all fall under the same heading: vampire biology, vampire physiology, and keep them coming. We can do these. Any topic also: vampire, werewolf, mage, wraith, changeling. I don't care. I like doing these, and they help me learn things. So until next time, I am Voivode Maquette. This is Our World of Darkness, and I will see you in the next video. Good evening.